was a surreal experience. There were so many people waiting for this verdict today. Family was waiting off-site, and then you had members of the media and the public quite literally camping out inside the courthouse waiting to see if a verdict would be read. We got the notification it was, and then it was chaos. Everybody coming down to the courthouse, trying to get into the courtroom the moment that this was read so that they could see what Lori Vallow Daybell's reaction was. And I can tell you at the time, it was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop, and I want to play that moment the verdict was read.
In the Superior Court of the State of Arizona in and for the County of Maricopa, State of Arizona versus Lori Daybell, CR 2021-001704-001, verdict count 1. We, the jury, duly impaneled and sworn in the above entitled action, upon our oaths, do find the defendant, Lori Daybell, as to the crime of count 1, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder occurring on or about July 11, 2019, guilty. Signed, foreperson. Is it?
And in that moment, each juror got up and confirmed that this was their decision. They had to come to that unanimous vote. But even after it was read, there was a little bit of confusion because we were supposed to go right into the aggravation phase. So it's almost like nobody even got a chance to digest what had happened. But Lori had no reaction. She just moved right into the aggravation phase. And it was so bizarre. They were supposed to start calling in witnesses to testify basically to this sentencing phase. Would the sentence be upped if they could prove certain things like this was with a deadly weapon, that there was an accomplice to this, that this crime caused emotional harm for others? And instead of having the jury listen to some people testify again, like Charles' sister Kay Woodcock, Lori Vallow stipulated those. What does that mean? Well, that means she basically is saying, I agree that those exist, and I want to waive this aggravation phase. So the judge was like, do you really want to do that? Because I, the judge, can find even more aggravating factors, and that could even up your sentence more. Lori doubled down. She said, yes, I do not want to go through with these witnesses coming forward with the jury. So the jury in that moment was brought back in after the verdict. They said, you're excused. You're done, completely done. And eventually now in months to come, the judge will decide on the sentence. That was Lori's decision because she has another trial here for the attempted shooting of Brandon Boudreaux. That is her niece's ex-husband. So it was almost like there wasn't even a breath right after the verdict was read for everybody to kind of process it. And it seemed Lori was just like, boom, we're going to go on to the next thing. I'm going to waive these. I want to get this done. I want to learn my sentence in a few months and let's go. And that was it. So there was really no emotional at all kind of even look to her. It was hard though because where we're all sitting we can see the back of her head, so it's not like she turned around and said anything or made any sort of facial expression to us. It's possible that the jury from where they were sitting might have seen what Lori's face looked like in that moment, but it appeared that she was unfazed, and I think that the jury felt that that was a pretty not surprising reaction from her given the fact that they had just watched over 2 weeks of testimony and video where Lori was nonchalant when Charles Vallow was dead the day that he died. So that was a really interesting moment, and after so much waiting and so much anxiety just to get to that point, it seemed like there was a sigh of relief from everybody, but gosh, it was quiet in that courtroom.
Yeah, it was real weird because the family speaking outside of court said they were like expecting some kind of big emotion, but seeing just from the back like you were of her, they couldn't glean anything. But they did say they were trying to make eye contact with the jury as they were coming in, and nobody made eye contact. So they were kind of, you know, emotional pins and needles waiting for that verdict to come down.
Right, and we heard from the jurors right after, too, that two of them were unsure of how they felt, and the other jurors had to kind of convince them to come to that guilty verdict. Some of the jurors were even unsure of their decisions until closing arguments, which really goes then to the prosecution, that Trina Kay, the prosecutor, must have made an impact on them in her 1 hour and 43-minute closing argument, which was very long. I mean, she meticulously went through each piece of evidence that we knew, certain words, certain videos, and I think that the jury really held on to that. But it seemed like when they were talking about after they came out today what really impacted them, it seemed like they felt that the text messages in this case, the crux of this case, was something that stood out to them, and then really no emotion from Lori Vallow Daybell, and the fact that there were so many missing parts to this story. I mean, I've been in the courtroom for the last 2 weeks, and we saw so much video of Tylee Ryan, Lori's daughter, and Alex Cox, her brother, who was the one that pulled the trigger on Charles Vallow. And I kept thinking, does the jury wonder where these people are? I mean, Tylee Ryan would have testified in this case, of course. She was an eyewitness to this crime. And it does sound like, now that we've been able to hear from them some, that they did wonder where Tylee was. And they did wonder what happened to Alex Cox. And then they get out of the courtroom and they learn her kids are dead. I mean, that is so surprising to an already very heavy case.
Briana, you were, as you mentioned, in the courtroom throughout this whole thing, and we saw Lori's defensive strategy change over time. In week 1, she was aggressively cross-examining witnesses. In week 2, she didn't call any defense witnesses, and she had a closing argument that was just 15 minutes long. Do you think Lori Vallow Daybell essentially gave up over time?
You could look at it like that. I think there were a couple things at play. One, maybe she thought it wasn't going well for her. I do feel like her cross-examination of Detective Duncan was some of the worst cross-examination that we've seen from her. It was just objection after objection. She couldn't figure out how to properly word her questions. And so at that point, maybe she decided, all right, I'm going to back down now before it could possibly get worse. But she also was having a lot of trouble subpoenaing people from the jail. And she talked about that with me in our jailhouse interview. She said she's having trouble getting out correspondence to people and making calls because she gets cut off by the jail cell phone and was having a hard time getting access to people. So we don't even know who was actually subpoenaed to be down here and who actually received that. But we do know at least one person was, just from our sources. And it just seems like at that point she thought, you know what, maybe I proved my case enough in my cross-examination. And if you talk to people who know Lori, they definitely say things like that, that she might have thought that she had done so well in her cross-examination that she felt that was enough to at least put reasonable doubt in the jury's minds and the jurors' minds. And I think that was something she really touched on in her closing argument. She kept saying that it was on the burden of the state to prove this crime without any reasonable doubt, without a reasonable doubt at all. And that's what she kind of kept hammering into. And it seems like that might have partially worked if 2 of the jurors were still unsure when they went into deliberations and the other 10 jurors had to convince them that all of this evidence was so overwhelming that this should be a guilty verdict. So it's hard to know exactly what is going through Lori's mind now. She didn't react. It's hard to know why she chose not to call any witnesses. And it could just simply be that she thought she did a good enough job to convince at least one juror that they couldn't come to a decision, and this would have been a whole different case.
The family